Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is the problem of NDEs. Before we get into it, just want to mention if you'd like to support this channel on Patreon, you can do so. When you join, you get advanced episodes on Sunday, a library of downloaded episodes for your podcast app, a Patreon email where you can talk back and forth, and a new chat for supporting patrons. And if you're interested, there is a link in the description. Next up, private lessons. If you'd like a lesson to learn how to astral project, I'd be more than glad to work with you. All you have to do is just go to the description. There's an email there and just request some information. Okay, the problem of NDEs. Now, NDEs, I'm sure most of you know that an NDE is a near-death experience. It's a cousin to astral projection. But in this case, it happens in usually very, very severe situations where the physical body is severely damaged and that the heart usually stops beating at some point. And the person having this near-death experience describes a set of things that generally happens to them. And then at some point, obviously, they come back because it's a near-death experience and not a death experience. I first encountered NDEs in the 70s. And when I read many of them, they made sense to me based on a lot of the things that I had seen. However, there was a distinct percentage of them, though, that kind of went off into a very dark direction, a dark direction that luckily I had never experienced. And the other direction that it was headed out to was so dark that I questioned for some period of time whether I was doing astral projection right. Because if astral projection was a cousin, let's say, of near-death experiences, then my experiences should not be completely alien to the NDE. If anything, the NDE would be more abbreviated because obviously if it's a near-death experience, you're not spending too much time on the other side. So if any difference, it would be that they would tend to have a very early type of astral projection type experience that someone who's in the very early stages of a projection might typically experience under certain circumstances. Because of the time factor, obviously. You can only be near death for so long, generally, before you actually make the big step itself. Now, before I get into that dark side that upset me, I'll get into the typical light side, which reminded me of astral projections. In near-death experiences, many times people report leaving their body because something happened. They were in an accident, they suddenly had a heart attack, whatever, and they found themselves leaving their body. And the one difference here is that they're not willing it. It's just kind of happening. So in common experiences, they find themselves being drawn out of their body. Sometimes they're looking down and they can kind of hear what's going on in the operating room, if that's where it happened, for instance. And then they're rising higher and higher. And generally, at some point, they're confronted with a relative, a loved relative of theirs, or they see a religious figure or some other comforting type entity, which then explains to them what's going on, and sometimes gets as far as a life review. There may be wisdom imparted, and then there's usually information that, well, you're going to have to go back now. Or sometimes you get a choice. Sometimes it's like, well, you can choose to go back or you can choose to stay. Many times people are saying, my goodness, this feels so great. I feel so loved. I really don't want to go back, but, my child or whatever else needs my help, so I'm going to choose to go back, for example. That's a typical, really generalized near-death experience, NDE. I probably should watch about how many times I say the DEATH word. It'll probably end up demonetizing the video. Whatever. So In this particular experience, that's pretty generally what I would see, starting back in the 70s. But what upset me is there was a certain percentage where people would describe being drawn down or taken down to a essentially pretty good picture of how we describe hell in your typical fundamental Christian belief, which is, a burning pit of darkness where various demonic entities have fun torturing you throughout all eternity. Obviously, I would have problems with this. Number one, because I'd never observed anything like that. Sure, I've seen the lower astral where poor lost spirits are consumed by their own fears, their own hatreds, their own addictions. But it's not eternal. Eventually, they find their way out, and eventually they ask for help, and that help is given, and they can then go from there. About the worst thing I've ever seen has been the subastral. And that's a place where the spirit involved has just devolved to such an extent that it's just vegetating now in this very dark area of the astral. But no one's sentenced them there. No one's forcing them to stay there. They're there because of their own willfulness. They're there because they don't want to do what's necessary to get back into the game. And so there they sit, essentially rotting in their own pool of sadness or self-hatred or just hatred or what have you. But no one's torturing them. There's no flames licking away, burning over their skin. I mean, I've heard horrid stories from some of these people who come back with these types of experiences. Things that you'd have a hard time sentencing a mass murderer to, or even, maybe you'd think, well, what about that dictator from Germany? Maybe you'd do that to him. Or, Mao Zedong, somebody who led to the death of many tens of millions of Chinese, in his little great leap forward. Or Stalin, who killed tens of millions of his own people in his purges. You might say, okay, maybe those folks deserve that type of eternal torture. Even then, part of me says, okay, I mean, torture them for a few thousand years, okay, but forever? It just seems, even for those folks, that, more than a few thousand years of that kind of agony is too much, even for them. But that doesn't seem to be the rule. So what do I make of these types of dark journeys? Quite frankly, I don't want to question, and I don't enjoy questioning religions. I understand the use of the belief of hell, and I understand where it really evolved. It evolved in the Middle Ages, not in Jesus' time. Yeah, there was the legend of Gehenna and all that kind of thing. But hell didn't really get worked out into excruciating detail until the Middle Ages and Middle Ages Christianity. And in my opinion, it was used as a fear mechanism. Because if you want power over somebody in the present while they're alive, threaten them with eternal torture after they pass. That would make only the most bravest or foolhardy not listen to you, because you have not only the keys to the eternal reward, but you have the keys to an eternal punishment, a punishment that, quite frankly, I think the average human today would be wary about inflicting upon even the worst individuals. Because even in our society, which is not completely just, we have our problems for sure. But we've got a lot of rules that say, okay, you're going to get sentenced and you're going to get punished based on the level of your crime. So if you're somebody who shoplifts a couple bottles of shampoo from a CVS, yeah, that's a crime, and yeah, you should have to pay for it. But we don't sentence those people to the same degree of punishment that we sentence somebody who is a serial killer. Because we understand that intuitively, though they're both crimes, or you might say sins, because they break various commandments, that we're not going to sentence someone to an eternal punishment that is equal for both crimes, because we understand that there is a deep, deep injustice about such a thing. Uh, even in our sense of justice, when somebody has committed a crime that is so, against the rules, that we sentence them to prison without the possibility of parole. I know some other countries don't have that, but that's the worst that we can do. Or some states that have the death penalty, they'll sentence them to that, and they'll sit in their cell for the next 25 to 30 years before it's ever carried out. But we understand that eventually, though, their punishment's going to come to an end. Because when they pass, we consider the punishment as done. But in this view of the universe, with these NDEs, these dark NDEs, there's fear. And you can tell when things are wrong, when there's huge amounts of fear created over something to do with the astral. And certainly, I think hell had a very powerful level of fear over people in the Middle Ages and people today. There are people today that are running their life not based on love for one another, but based on a fear that if they do something bad, that they're going to go to the really bad place for all eternity. And the problem is that the traditional Bible has so many sins, so many crimes, and it's got to be, nerve wracking to know, like, okay, if I steal these bottles of shampoo from CVS, is that going to be enough to toss my butt into hell? Like where's the dividing line? Because nobody knows the exact line. Some people will say, well, as long as you confess and are truly sorry for your crimes, then you're not gonna go to hell. So that seems like an out. But then there's also little things in the Bible that say, well, there's an unforgivable sin. If you blaspheme against the Holy Spirit, well, that's an unforgivable crime. And I'm not even going to address exactly what that means, because there's a lot of confusion over what that means. But believe me, I believe that you could be guilty of that particular sin just by uttering one particular sentence, which a lot of us have probably already uttered. So there's a big part of me that rebels against this. I don't know what these people are seeing. Quite frankly, I have never and hope to never discover an area of the astral where there's some sort of eternal punishment wing set up to torture folks for all eternity because they didn't say the right thing, didn't ask for the right forgiveness. We're part of the wrong religion, had the wrong beliefs. I reject all of that personally because I've never witnessed anything like that. And I don't like questioning people and their beliefs and or what they've reported, but I have my sincere doubts that there is a hell that is the same as what is described in your typical Christian mythology and in some of these, what I call dark NDEs. I say, when it's your time, venture boldly into the next world. Love others and treat others as you would like to be loved and treated. And in my belief system, for whatever it's worth, I think you're going to be just fine. But hey, that's just me. What do you guys think about this whole dark NDE thing? Have you ever had an NDE? If so, did you observe any legions of demonic beings, torturing people in horrible ways for all eternity? If so, share it. Let's hear. If you've had some good ones, where you meet your loved ones, maybe do a little bit of a life review. Please share those as well, because I'm very much interested in your opinions about this whole dark NDE phenomena. Well, if you like that, please hit the like button, share it with those of like minds, subscribe if you haven't already. And as I said, questions, comments, share your experiences and questions, and we'll go from there. And as always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.